Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host, Mike Reed, and this is Scotch and Scholars. My guest tonight is Jayant Bhandari. If you don't already know, Jayant is a world-traveling investment advisor. He's worked with KC Research, U.S. Global Investors, and Indian subsidiary companies of two other European companies. And somehow, amidst all the world traveling and advising he does, he also finds time to write for the Mises Institutes, the one in the United States, one in Canada, the Fraser Institute, and Liberty Magazine. So there's lots of Jayant Bhandari all over the world. But today I want to start by talking especially about your upcoming conference, your yearly conference in Vancouver, Capitalism and Morality. So Jayant, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah. So this conference, it's at the end of July this year, right?
That's correct. It's on the 30th of July, 2016 in Vancouver at the Simon Fraser University's main campus in downtown Vancouver.
Oh, nice. That's a beautiful place.
It is one of the oldest buildings in Vancouver, and that makes it a very nice place to hold a conference on morality and Western civilization and reason.
Oh, all right. So this really takes us into something I've been enjoying in your writing for years now, in terms of your emphasis on capitalism and morality. I notice a lot of scholars in the liberty scene, a lot of writers focus more on institutions or laws, private property, and so on. And you seem to think that that's a secondary issue, and the real prime driving force is the morality, or you might say the national character of people in a country. Is that right?
Absolutely. So, Mike, you can have the best institutions possible, but they will degenerate and decay very rapidly if the underlying society does not have the culture of reason, and if the underlying society does not have the culture of respect for the individual. So really, a lot of countries around the world got Western institutions, but all those institutions got decayed and degenerated into something horrible because the underlying culture was not supportive of those institutions. So you must first work on the culture and the character of the individuals, without which no change is possible.
Wow. So my experience is that a lot of people, myself included, tend to think of the institutions themselves as driving the culture. So we see in the rise of Soviet Russia a pressure on the individual to use corruption in order to just get through daily life, to use black market activities to bribe officials and so on. And it sort of the institutions as driving morality. But you don't see it that way. Is that right?
Well, it's very important to go to Russia and go to China and go to India and try to understand the mentality of the individual in these countries. And you very soon realize that while he wants corruption to go away in his society, he himself does not want to give up his own corrupt practices. People in these societies have a tendency to tell me and you how I and you should live. Now, when this is the character of the individual, the kind of society and the kind of institutions they generate are institutions that are fed poison, and these institutions will be corrupt, despite the fact that these people on surface might want corruption to end. Corruption will not end until these people have cleaned up their thinking, they have adopted reason, and they have adopted honesty and integrity in their own lives.
So you've talked a lot about we've only got 3 minutes in, but you've talked a lot about the importance of reason itself. What do you mean by reason? I mean, isn't every human on the planet using their mind as best as they can to solve problems in their life?
No, not actually, Mike. And this is a surprising discovery one makes if you really travel around the world and try to understand how people around the world live. The concept of reason is, even today, despite the fact that we have had internet for the last 30 years and we have been interacting with people around the world for the last 200 years or so, the concept of reason is still a predominantly a Western concept. You only see the concept of reason in North Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. The concept of reason is almost missing completely in Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia. And so, for example, you cannot really negotiate or discuss or argue with people from these countries. Most of what these people do is to exchange slogans and beliefs and superstitions. And if you pay attention, that's what you start to understand about these societies.
So instead of reason, what are people doing with their brains in your view?
Well, I have completely failed to understand what they do with their brains, but their brains are loaded. Their brains are loaded with irrationality, superstitions, and beliefs. So the brain actually has a lot more work to do than your and my brain does, but it has to process beliefs and superstitions and irrationality. So if I tell someone, for example, in India, and say that this is what reason dictate that you should do, his response will most likely be that in our society, in our religion, this is not how we do things. We should do it this way because that's how we have always done it. Now, he is overloaded with information and beliefs, but this is not attached to any reasoning or critical thinking. And you very soon start to discover how lacking most of these societies are in terms of reason and critical thinking.
This is just astounding. I mean, I've been reading your work for a while, but I didn't realize how fully and energetically you believe this. I'm not terribly convinced that I'm very reasonable or free of superstition. But I wonder how this indicates strategies for you in your investment work. I mean, a lot of what you do, you spend your time flying around the planet. You told me you're planning to travel to Canada, India, traveling Asia later on. I think you've done a bunch of China travel. And you do this looking, as an investment advisor, looking for opportunities for capitalist engagement. Can you tell me how this understanding of people's mindsets shapes your thinking about good investment opportunities in countries where you think people aren't mostly reasonable?
Well, Mike, for me, life and work and fun, all these things are the same things. I travel the world to experience the world. I enjoy traveling. And by understanding how those people think and how they produce wealth, I try to understand how I can get involved and make profit from my involvement in those people. And being a rational person, you also take into account their irrationality in a lot of these countries. And that leads you, so the concept of reason and the concept of fun, the concept of enjoying and understanding the culture of these countries enables you to put all these things together and then make an investment strategy to understand how you can make money from investing in these countries.
So you treat it like just another constraint, just another thing like geography or institutions that shapes what's happening in the country. Is that right?
Absolutely. So, right now there's so much talk about India becoming a superpower, India becoming the next China. And IMF and World Bank today came out with a news saying that India's growth rate will outpace Chinese growth rate, and it will be better than they thought a couple of months earlier.
Okay.
Now, what is it all based on? Because Indian central bank is printing more paper, because Indian government is investing more in infrastructure, and it will be pushing for more industrialization. But any person with reason understands that this is not going to happen. Printing paper does not create wealth. Forcing industrialization on people does not generate wealth either. It's almost always a wealth destructive step. And in my view, all this is going to result into decay of economic growth rather than increase in economic growth. So again, my views are very different from the views that IMF and World Bank has. And I think India will actually worsen as time passes by.
Wow. And is that a similar view that you have on the development in China, which is also hyped a lot in terms of reports from economic agencies?
Well, I am very optimistic about China. China is, remember, Chinese are among the smartest people in the world. Now, of course, you go to China, and I go to China quite often, and you see a lot of filth and people making a lot of noise and rude behavior. But remember, this country has grown from a wretched society, a wretched communist society 30 years back, to one of the richer countries, rich enough that you now compare China with the US. And that shows an enormous amount of progress that that country has made. And that it has made that progress despite that all these people, World Bank and IMF and the US government, wanted China to accept democracy and set up Western kind of institutions in China. But China has grown despite all these institutions. Had they adopted Western institutions, China would have done what India is doing today, which is that China would still be a wretched, poor country.
Wow, I feel like my world is upside down from the usual economic development thinking to the Jayant Bhandari way of foreseeing the world.
Well, you have to really see, and I go to China and I feel much more free in China than I feel in most of the other places in the world. The police does not interfere with my life. The banks and a lot of organizations are open 7 days a week, and they open early in the morning and they're open until much later in the evenings. So you can go to banks on a Sunday or a Saturday and take your money out. China is a very capitalistic economy, and the word communist and dictatorship should not confuse you.
So the fact that China is nonetheless is undemocratic, is ruled by a tight-fisted political elite, does not seem to you like a big problem in terms of economic development. Is that true?
Well, absolutely. Democracy is the worst possible system you can have. Democracy is truly, nothing gets worse than democracy, because in a democratic system, the masses decide who runs your institutions. And the masses are the least competent people to decide who runs the institutions. Masses are driven by their survival needs, and they can't think about tomorrow. The masses cannot reason. And these people should never be allowed to decide who runs your government. Democracy, once you accept democracy, it's downhill thereafter. And in my view, Western countries reached their intellectual peak before they accepted democracy. After democracy, it has been downhill for all these Western countries. And really, Mike, you have to look at what's happening in the US. Every president cycle gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And now in Canada, you have a baby ruling you as your prime minister. So this is democracy.
So you think Westerners are kind of coasting on the successes from our 1800s and early 1900s monarchical era? Is that true?
Well, there's always economic progress does not have to happen right after intellectual progress happens. But so there's this time lag between economic progress. Economic and scientific progress has continued despite that intellectually the West reached its peak maybe 100 or 200 years back. And now the West is in decline, it's stagnating. What you see is negative yields all over. The institutional environment in the West is becoming increasingly oppressive, because that is the mind of the masses. You are ruled by the masses, and things, in my view, will not turn around until you have seen the end of democracy in the West. Now, I know it sounds very far-fetched, but I don't see how things will turn around in the West until the masses are removed from decision making in terms of who rules your governments, who runs your governments.
Wow. So at the beginning of the conversation, I was under the impression that generally you thought the Western mindset was more reasonable, more rational than the mindset in India or China or other countries you work in. But it sounds like that in terms of the trajectory, China might be intellectually moving upward and the United States and Canada downward. Is that what you think?
Absolutely. But more than that, I think the big problem with the West today is that the institutions are in the hands of the irrational elements of the West today. And the institutions, the more democratic you become, the more a society has a tendency to put irrational elements into positions of power, sociopaths into the position of power, because the masses are gullible. They can't see into tomorrow. They can't really weigh different aspects of decision making. But again, when I say that the West is much more rational than the East, it's actually true. The West is really much more rational, and that's why the GDP of an average Western person is about $50,000 per year, whereas GDP of places like India is only about $1,500 a year. That makes it a very wretched and poor society.
But in the long run, the rationality, you think there's a decline in rationality itself. There's sort of an intellectual peak of the West, so like 100 or 200 years ago, and now there's an ongoing decline. So in the long run, a century forward, we might see a world that's not Western-led in terms of economic or intellectual development.
Well, in my view, the future of the world is in China, because those are the people who are really copying the best of the West right now. And there's a tendency to compare the US with China, which is very erroneous thing to do, because China is still a wretched, poor place. But the way they are changing tells me that this change might continue. Now, Mike, you cannot really foresee the future, but almost certainly the West is in decline intellectually and economically. It's stagnating.
Wow. All right. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about some of your own experiences. There's this article you wrote about Bhopal 1984. The audience doesn't know that's the world's worst industrial disaster of all time. And I'd been reading Jayant Bhandari stuff for years before that, but this is the article that really jumped out at me and helped me understand the connection between your biography and your ideas and your work. So can you tell me what happened in Bhopal 1984 and then tell me how you experienced it?
Well, I was in Bhopal in 1984. I was a teenager living with my parents, and we woke up very early in the morning, about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, because of this strange, pungent smell in the air. And there was also a lot of noise and sirens that we could hear. Our house was not very far from the highway. And when I went up to the roof, I saw hundreds of cars with sirens leaving the city. What became very clear a few hours later was that there was an enormous gas leakage in a chemical plant in Bhopal, which had resulted in deaths of thousands of people. And the first thing the government officers did was to put their families in the emergency vehicles and government cars and flee from the city. So they ran away from the city with the infrastructure and emergency logistics of the city. We were left with nothing.
Wow. So not only are you suddenly without government, but you're also without ambulances and police cars and fire trucks.
Absolutely. All those people, most of those people had run away. And because they had monopolized infrastructure and emergency services, we did not have any private emergency services with us. Even the hospitals were public hospitals. And, there were people on the road dying. There were animals, dead animals all over. The hospitals were packed with people, but there weren't many doctors. They just had run away. It was an horrible situation in that city, and that continued for many months thereafter.
So the leak itself, like the poisonous gas itself, how long does that last? Is that only like the first day or 2 days?
Well, the leakage happened within a few hours. This was a big tank that leaked the gas.
Okay.
But remember, this gas is a poisonous gas which killed thousands of people. And I think the latest estimate is between about 15 to 20,000 people, almost very rapidly. But hundreds of thousands of people were affected by this gas. There is, even today, there are many hospitals in Bhopal that cater, and this is now 30 years later. There are many big hospitals in Bhopal that even today cater only to the gas victims and their children.
So lingering negative effects for people's bodies, lingering health effects for
Right.
decades.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was at the chemical factory a few years back to write this article, and I wanted to research what changes had happened at the chemical factory. And
Right.
I could just walk in unhindered into the factory. The factory is just crumbling. Their chemicals is still lying around in the factory. The water supplies close to that factory has a lot of chemicals in it, because the government hasn't really cleaned things up. They confiscated the factory. They stole all the money that Union Carbide gave to the government of India, and then they did not do the cleanup. And it is still continues to be unclean. You and I can walk into that factory tomorrow without any problem.
That's horrifying. So the disaster itself could happen again tomorrow.
Well, the worst of the chemicals are no longer there. But and this is the bad thing, because if a disaster happens in a moment, it's so much better because people recognize it. When poisoning happens slowly, you kill a society, and there is nothing that changes about how you run your institutions and your system. So the country has done nothing to change anything about that society. The waterways are horrible and very polluted in that country. No one takes any effort because it does not kill you right away, but disease grow and accumulate with time.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about how this connects to your understanding of institutions, morality, the importance of decentralization. So it's not just the poison gas that is so devastating here. It's the loss of faith in the organization, or can you explain what happens in the social effects?
So Mike, two Indians together is one too many. They, and this is the problem. They cannot reason. You cannot negotiate with each other. So now you are running a country of $1.3 billion, 1.3 billion people, sorry, as a single entity. It does not work. All right. Indians are incapable of forming organizations. And really, you see that in the Middle East and in Africa as well. These are tribal people because they operate through a system of beliefs and superstitions and irrationality. Only reason allows you to work with other people. And the result is that none of these organizations and institutions work in that country. You can get away with murder and rape if you want to, as long as you pay bribes and if you are properly connected. It's an extremely and extraordinarily corrupt system, and as a country, as a society. But let me go deeper into it, because you will say, well, maybe it's just the problem with the institutions. So my maternal grandmom died with about 15 tenants in her house.
Okay.
And all these people had grown up in that house. they treated my grandmom as their mom, basically.
Okay.
And my grandmom took all these tenants to a temple to get them to pledge that they would leave the house when my mom asked them to leave.
Okay.
My grandmom died, and not one of them agreed to leave the house.
Wow. So
So
this house was to be part of the inheritance of your mother in the family.
absolutely, absolutely. So what I'm trying to convey to you, Mike, is that it's an extraordinarily dishonest culture where you cannot trust your friends and family. When you cannot trust them, and when each individual is so corrupt, you will have institutions and people running governments that will be corrupt. You can do the best thing possible. You can send Swiss and English to set up the best organizations in these countries. They won't work because the people running those institutions will still come from a society that is very poisoned by dishonesty.
Wow. This a very bracing analysis of the situation. So this returns to your broader point from earlier that cultural change needs to occur. An emphasis on reason and morality needs to rise at the everyday lives of people before institutional or economic change can kick in.
Absolutely. So, Mike, without reason, so God did not give us a book saying that these are, you should have compassion, you should have respect for the individual, you should have the rule of law. These are things that emerge in a society based on the concept of reason. The West got the concept of reason 2,500 years back. And it took West about 2 millennia to develop institutions and concepts based on reason. And remember, without reason, you will still take hundreds of years before you can develop the concept of reason and humane institutions. Humane institutions, the way you and I imagine what a humane institution is. But these societies will not develop those until you have infused the concept of reason in these societies. And I am not seeing that yet.
Wow. Wow. Jayant Bhandari, this has been a mind-opening experience, a wonderful chance to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to check in with us, talk about your ideas, and also this upcoming conference. Can you tell us just a little bit before we close about who is speaking at the Capitalism and Morality Conference in Vancouver on July 30th?
I have been running this seminar for the last 7 years now, and it's a one-day seminar in Vancouver. And my approach is to give respect to the concept of reason, respect the concept of philosophy, bring in people who challenge my thinking and the thinking of my audience. For many years, I have brought some of the best philosophers to come and speak at my seminar. Doug Casey usually speaks at my seminar. The keynote speakers this year will be Jon Narveson and Dr. Warren Farrell. Dr. Warren Farrell will be talking about men's rights, for example. So again, he's going to talk against feminism, the way it is practiced today. And the reason I bring in these kind of topics and these kind of speakers is because I want to open people's mind. I want to challenge their established paradigms, because what we want is a thinking mind. That's all.
Wow. Wow. Astounding, Jan. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to start by telling people a little bit about how they can get more Jayant Bhandari and get connected to the Capitalism and Morality Conference. And I'll tell people about a couple other shows coming up this week on Liberty.me Live. And then I'll turn it back over to you, Jayant, for the final word. So the best place to get Jayant Bhandari is jayantbhandari.com. I'll put the link in the description. And if you want to check out his writing on the Bhopal disaster, it really is gripping. Don't read it before bed, like do it before you have something cheerful to do afterwards. That is on his liberty.me site, giant.liberty.me, and I'll put that link in too. Now, I also want you guys to check out a couple more shows that are coming this week on liberty.me live. One is Unbiased America. We've got an Unbiased America show on Wednesday night. I know some of those guys like Will Riccardella are down at CPAC, so there's going to be a lot of fun there. I'm sure they're engaged in the political scene, talking about the recurring degradation of presidential cycles. Here we are at the hopefully the very bottom of the morality of the 2015-2016 presidential cycle, and they'll be reporting on that. And then on Sunday night, we have Tucker and Clark Being Earnest. So that's Jeffrey Tucker and Joey Clark talking together. And they're talking about the death of conservatism. And again, I think they're focusing on what you see here in terms of the degradation of Western intellectual heritage over the last several years. So, Jayant, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to you now for the final word.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Mike, today. All I can say is that Western society should stick with the concept of reason and critical thinking and not give in to the creeping cultural Marxism that's been happening in the West for the last many decades. So again, thank you very much, and thank you very much for promoting my seminar, Capitalism and Morality.
Okay, have a great day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on liberty.me live. We'll see you again soon.